Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Kim Davis, trying to make sure I bring in the crowd from, hang on one second, over from Instagram. I had a little technical difficulty right before we went live. So let me see if I can add them in and handle this. All right, everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. Today is Tuesday, March the 26th. Can you believe that we're almost through the first quarter of 2024? There is so much to get to, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do Instagram Live today just because, oh, wait, let's see. Yep, it looks like we are. So I will welcome to my folks over on Instagram. It looks like that they are preparing to join us. In the meantime, how is your March Madness going? Was the first weekend of March Madness, it lived up to all the hype? It was indeed mad. I was able to get one of my sisters to watch a little bit of it, and not a whole lot, but a little more than she had planned because that's not really her thing. And it piqued her interest for a few moments, but there were upsets on the men's side. Kentucky is out, Auburn's out. There are others who did not make it past the first round. That's kind of what you expect in March Madness. On the women's side, all the top seeds are advancing, and there was still some excitement. There were overtime games. There were come from behind. LSU had to kick it up a notch to get through. Caitlin Clark in Iowa last night got behind. They were able to pull out the win over West Virginia. South Carolina is just doing what South Carolina does, right? South Carolina is just hang on a second. Give me 1 second. I want to make sure that we can bring him in. It doesn't look like we have him in Instagram just because I changed something on the way in. But listen, South Carolina, if I just had to jump right in today and tell you, so who are you picking, Kim, in the women's side? I am still going with South Carolina. They are so good, and they're going to have a bit of an off day, in my opinion, to lose in the tournament. So we're going to get into all of that. Of course, on the weekend, it was Texas A&M on Sunday and the University of Houston. I knew that game was going to be a tough matchup for the Cougs just because of how the two teams had faced off and competed earlier in the year. And it was indeed that. The Cougs, they started a little slow, and then you said, okay, then they got back into it. They got together, they got it together, and then they did not. Many people are saying, man, it was the officials, but it depends on the officiating crew you get and how they call the game. University of Houston is they play defense. They're very physical. Texas A&M takes the ball to the hole a lot. That is a perfect recipe for fouls and in terms of what happens inside. And so that's what happened. At the end of the game, the University of Houston had 4 starters who had fouled out. So as my sister and I were sitting there watching, I told her, I said, it's basically the two of us and my other sister, Sylvia, who wasn't even watching, who they have on the court. Now that's it. No disrespect to the players who stepped up, right? Because when you talk about next man up, that's what it is. But they had to really tough that one out. They won it in overtime. It went down to the wire. Next up for the University of Houston is Duke. And that game we played in Dallas, it will be somewhat like a home game for the Cougars because it's right up the street. Cougar and Houston fans can drive to Dallas, and it should be interesting. I don't think it'll be the same kind of game that we saw. I think it'll be competitive. I think it'll be a really good game. Duke has a good program, but they don't really create the kind of matchup problems and challenges that Texas A&M did. So, it should be the Cougars should advance. Can they win it all? They can. They haven't looked totally Cougar-esque. I mean, they did in the game against Longwood in the first round. But, they're a little shorthanded, and they're going to have to continue to bring it. And so they can win it all. We'll see what happens this weekend. It's the Sweet 16. They're playing for a shot to get to the Final Four in Phoenix and to ultimately win it all. Most people, many people, are still picking UConn on the men's side to win it all because UConn has looked really, really good. And let me say this while we're talking about UConn. This time of year, we always see these questions from other not just fans, but some sports analysts saying, "Man, it's UConn this year, right? Because they're the team that's the number one team in the country. The University of Houston entered the tournament as the number two team in the country. But saying, man, UConn is so dominant. UConn could probably play in the play-in for the NBA. How would they fare?" And I just say, stop it. Okay. UConn is really good, but they're not going to be able to compete with an NBA team. It's just not going to happen. So let's just squash that and get that out of the way. That's not happening. But UConn is really good. And, a UConn University of Houston championship matchup would be super exciting. I just hope the Cougars, and you guys know I have a interesting relationship with the University of Houston, and not the players or the coaches. It's just their administration and the sports information people. It's them. And I've talked about it over the years, but I can't, I'm not going to not talk about the University of Houston, which is one of the biggest stories in the city right now. And one of the big stories in basketball around the country, because it is March Madness. And so, yes, it'd be great for the city and for Coach Kelvin Sampson. I had a chance to cover him when he was coaching, an assistant coach with the Houston Rockets, and briefly when I was trying to cover the University of Houston until their sports information department people just got beyond ridiculous. And I said, you know what? I fight battles every day in doing this job, and that's just not what I'm going to take on. Business lesson is you've got to pick the battles. What makes sense, And so I don't, but I absolutely would like to see them go all the way and win it. They defeated my Texas A&M Aggies, and my sister was like, "Well, you're not really pulling for A&M." I said, "Listen, I'm an Aggie. I don't think A&M could win it all. I do think Houston could win it all. Do I think they will? I have absolutely no idea, but stay tuned. We're going to find out more this weekend when the tournament shifts into the Sweet 16. And listen, if you have not checked out any of the women's games, if you don't really watch women's basketball, take the time during this tournament, check it out. Tune in and see what all the hype is. It is not just Caitlin Clark, although she is an amazing player, but it is just the women's game that people are excited to watch. There are other players, there's Juju Watkins, and of course there's Angel Reese at LSU. LSU has not looked great like they did when they won it last year, but anything can happen. They are a super talented team, but there are other players. You can see Paige Buchers, pick somebody from South Carolina. It's just been really good basketball. So tune in if you haven't seen it. And I think if you like competition, if you like basketball and good basketball, you will appreciate what's happening on the women's side and the women's game. And if you like competition, if you're even a huge basketball fan, you will enjoy some of the stories. And so that's one of the cool things about March Madness. Don't be left out. Enjoy it. So speaking of basketball, the Houston Rockets, y'all, they on a roll. Okay. They have won now 9 straight. They've lost 1 game in the month of March. They're winning at home. They're winning on the road. They started out slow last night against Portland, but they got it together, and it was the defense. It always goes back to the defense. Jalen Green continues to soar, and I'm going to pull up just the numbers from last night in terms of how the box score. It was an important win. This Houston Rockets team, the final last night was 110-92. And some of you may say, well, Kim, Portland's not that great. They should have beat Portland. But it's still the NBA, right? And you can't count anybody out. The final last night was 110-92. Jalen Green finished with 27 points. Let me get the box score for the game last night. And pull it up. Here we go. So they started out, I mean, in the second quarter, they only scored 19 points, right? And in the third quarter, they turned it back up. They scored 33 points in the third quarter, outscored Portland 33-20. But let's look at the box score. I'm going to tell you a name, and you're going to say who has really had some very good moments off the bench. He is starting now because last night, we know that Alperen Şengün is hurt, but also Jabari Smith Jr., who's been starting at the 5, the center position since Alperen went out with the injury, was serving a 1-game suspension for the scuffle he had against Dunn in the game on Saturday night, the blowout win over Utah. Jock Landale, you heard it. Jock Landale last night in 32 minutes had 17 points. I think he had 13 of those points, maybe 50. Was it 13 points in the first half, in the first quarter? He had 17 points and 9 rebounds. He's been very productive. And I was sitting there talking to one of my colleagues in press row. I said, yeah, he's going to really be all iced up after the game. And so Jacques Landale is continuing to step in. And one of the things that Ime Udoka talked about was how they have gotten contributions from so many people. So, for instance, I mentioned Jacques Landale. I remember Alperen Şengün is out. He's injured. Tari Eason's out for the season. He had surgery. Cam Whitmore is still out. And so and Jabari Smith last night didn't play because he was serving a 1-game suspension. Reggie Bullock had 15 minutes off the bench. He had 5 rebounds. Jeff Green had 23 minutes off the bench. He finished with 6 points and 4 rebounds, but he was very active defensively. Aaron Holiday had 23 points. I like him. He's just super dependable. He had 11 points, 4 assists, and 3 rebounds. This is off the bench. And then Jayshawn Tate had 8 points off the bench with 4 rebounds. So, what they've been able to do, we hear the next man up, which sounds very much like coach speak and very cliche, but it is what has been happening with this Houston Rockets team. Here is head coach Ime Udoka last night, really talking about the fact of what it means to have this kind of depth and to be able to count on other people to step up when you need it. Here's Coach Udoka.
Rely on certain guys to be consistent, do what they do on a nightly basis, but when they're not, it was great. An example of Jock tonight and the others. The 3 bench scorers last game, so they gave us a great boost. And our guys are going to consistently do what they do, but when they don't, it's great to have those other options. And like I said, our depth is real. Even with those 4 guys out, we still have 9 or 10 we can throw out there and be confident in.
So right now, this Houston Rockets team is a half game back, 0.5 of the Golden State Warriors for that 10th and final spot in the playoffs to get into the play-in tournament, right? There are 10 games left in the regular season, and here's the Rockets schedule. They're at Oklahoma City tomorrow night. Then they're at Utah on Friday, another game that promises to be chippy because they've been chippy every time they've met. Then they're back home on Easter evening, and they play host to the Dallas Mavericks. And they're on the road again at Minnesota. They have Golden State at home next Thursday night, and then there's a back-to-back. Then they have Miami at home. So it is it's busy. Their month of April, they have 3 games at home and 5 games on the road. So they finish on the road the last 3 games of the season. They play at Utah and then at Portland, and those are back-to-backs, it's Thursday and Friday. And then on that Sunday, they have an afternoon game against the LA Clippers, their last regular season game of the year. It could be the last game, period, or they could end up in the play-in. Anything is possible. And, while Coach Udoka says he doesn't really focus on it, he just knows what they have to do night in, night out in terms of preparing and being productive and playing defense, and they've got to win the games. But Jalen, after the game last night, said, no, I'm very tuned in. And they all are. He said, I'm watching Golden State. Was watching him last night. I'll be watching him the next time they play. And so it's exciting because remember, guys, I've covered the Houston Rockets a long time, right? I covered them back when they won 2 championships. That was in the 90s. And then, they had some great teams since then. I covered them that 8-year stretch when they were in the playoffs. And the last time that this team was playing for something that mattered other than pride in, March of this season was in 2019, 2020. That was the COVID year, but that was the last time this team got to a playoff, the 2019-2020 year. So it has been 4 years since they've been in the talk about a playoffs. Now we don't know if they'll get there. I mean, they could win out. I mean, that's, will they win every game? They've won 9 in a row, but all they can control is their side. So I told you about they're half a game behind. Let me tell you the other numbers. They're half a game back in the Western Conference. So Golden State is in the 10th spot. Houston is 11. So they've moved up. There's several games ahead of Utah, which has a 12th spot. They're half a game behind Golden State, and they're 3 games behind the Lakers for the 9th spot. They just got to get in, right? They're just trying to get in. And, Golden State has had its own challenges. Listen, of course it's Golden State, right? Has Golden State not been the nemesis of this Houston Rockets franchise over the last, decade? Of course there was a 4-year stretch really where the Rockets weren't really that relevant in terms of competing for playoff spots. But every time they made those runs, when Dwight Howard was here, well, they lost to the Clippers in, but when James Harden was here, and then when Chris Paul was here, they were fighting against the Golden State Warriors, and the Golden State was just dominant. So now Golden State is not as dominant. Steph Curry is still there. They still have some of those pieces of Draymond Green and Klay Thompson. Now Chris Paul is there, CP3, and Steve Kerr is still the coach. But it's Golden State again, right? I was talking with someone in the organization the other day, and they said, of course it's Golden State. But, this is what makes it fun, to be relevant and to be talking about having a shot late in the game. Hey, good morning, everybody. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Charles says, I'm loving the women's tournament it's some great basketball, right? It's some great basketball. And it's great throughout the year. It's not even just March Madness, but this is a time when people who might not normally check it out will. And so check it out. Alita says, stop it. I know you're talking about UConn can't play in the NBA. They couldn't compete for a play-in spot. Just stop it. Hey, Josie, I got to come see you, my friend. It's been a minute. Good morning to my sister. Hey, Kofi, he says, boy, if U of H lost that game, that would have been terrible. They were up by 12, 13, forced 2 turnovers and ready to blow them out, but committed. Yeah, Kofi, if they had lost that game, that would have been, like Charles Barkley, terrible. That would have just been terrible. Can't believe I quoted Charles Barkley. But that would have been awful, And listen, when A&M and U of H faced off in the regular season, U of H won that game, but by 4 points. It was 70 to 66. So we knew if you followed these two teams that that A&M creates some matchup challenges, right? Just because of how they play. And so people were I saw a lot of mostly U of H fans online complaining about the officiating, but that's how they call the game. And so if they call the game with a team that's so physical, like U of H plays defense, and the fact that A&M went on like a 13-2 run late in the game against that U of H defense is impressive for Texas A&M. It really was. If they were able to get back in that game, shoot some big shots, some big threes, and if the one kid, Wade, who they count on a lot and had a better game, it could have been different. But I don't really do the if I coulda, because if I had a fifth, we'd be drunk. Isn't that the saying? But it was fun to watch. And U of H had to really, count on some guys who, are not usually in that position. And so as they were standing there, I told my sister, I said, this is what pressure looks like, right? How do you handle the pressure? When you're a guy who never really gets in, now you're on the free throw line and they need you to make both of the shots would be great, but you got to make one of them. That's what pressure looks like on national television for a chance to get to the Sweet 16, to continue this U of H Cougars' hopes and dreams of getting to the Final Four and ultimately winning a championship. To get there, um, it was something. So you're right about that, Kofi. Hey, good morning to my other sister. Welcome from out West Carolina. It's good to see you. Alita says if A&M had hit more free throws, they'd have lost. Right. They did. They went to the line at one point. I forget the final number. I'll have to look. But if they had shot their free throws, but those are all the ifs, right? They shot the free throws. If U of H, hadn't had the turnovers. I mean, there's so many things, but that's what makes it so exciting. That is what college athletics. That's the exciting thing about college athletics. Now, granted, the NBA has been exciting lately too. I've covered these Rockets all year. I've covered them the past several years. And this stretch that they're on right now has been super exciting. And let me just say this as I hop back to the NBA. When you talk about the Houston Rockets, you talk about what Jalen Green has been over this past month, especially in the absence of Alper and Shingun. It makes you go, wow, what does this look like when Alper and Shingun is back? So here's one of the things is happening. And for those who say, oh man, they don't need Alperin. No, Alperin Shingun is a really good player. But what happens is when you have the big guy in the middle like Alpi, it clogs things up and it throws the spacing off. And spacing, and if you think about, spacing creates those opportunities for Jalen to move and do what he does. And so he has taken advantage of it. He stepped up and, reminded people that he's a pretty good scorer, and that he can shoot. So it's a good problem to have. Ime Udoka will have to earn his money and figure out how to make that all mesh together when all the pieces are there. So, but for now, this is what it is. Without Alpi, without Cam Whitmore, Jabari is back. He was just a 1-game suspension. The kid from Utah had 2 games he had to sit, but they've got to get back and head to Oklahoma, a very good Oklahoma City team. In fact, Oklahoma City is right there with Denver. Denver right now in the Western Conference is in the 1 spot. Oklahoma City is 2. Oklahoma City is only 1 game behind Denver. And then Minnesota, the top 3 teams in the West, any of those teams could finish with the 1 seed. Denver is at 1. They are 51 and 21. Oklahoma City's in the 2 spot right now. They're 49 and 21, and Minnesota is 49 and 22. So a game and a half is really what separates the top 3 teams in the Western Conference. It is going to be pretty exciting down the stretch. Meanwhile, not that the East doesn't matter. In the East, Boston, who lost a game to the Hawks last night, and people were like, wow, what does that mean? It means they lost to the Hawks. They are the top seed in the West. They have already, basically clinched home court. They are at 57 wins. Let me get back. 57 wins right now. In terms of teams in the East, Milwaukee is closest to them, but they're 10 games back when it comes to playoffs. So Boston's 1, Milwaukee's 2, and then the 3 and 4, Cleveland is 13 games behind. New York is 13 and a half games behind. But that first spot, Boston is going to have home court throughout. But that is not a concern right now. The Houston Rockets, what they are trying to do is get to the play-in spot, right? And if you heard, we had a special show, an extra show last week on Thursday with Calvin Murphy, and he reminded us that back in 1981, was it? That as he said it, his words, not mine, the Houston Rockets backed into the playoffs. They had a 40 and 42 record, and they backed into the playoffs, right? They were less than 500. It ended up in the finals. They lost to Boston in the championship. The Rockets right now are 36 and 35. It's the first time they've been over 500 since January, if not longer than that. So it's listen, I don't think many people thought at the beginning of this season that this team could possibly get to 40 wins. They could. They have 10 games left, and right now they're at 36 and 35. Um, they could, they absolutely could get to 40 wins, but what they're trying to do is get enough wins to get into that 10th spot in the play-in for a chance to get into the playoffs, but just to be in postseason. Play-in is the postseason, right? That's it's a you know one game shot with four teams facing off. And right now, the four teams that are in the play in, Dallas is at 7, Phoenix is at 8, the Lakers are at 9, and Golden State's 10. And so here's the other thing. I don't believe in conspiracies. I don't think the NBA fixes games. So I'm going to preface my next statement with that. But do I think that the NBA would much rather have Golden State and the Lakers in the play-in than a Houston team? Absolutely. Because of the stars, right? Because you you want LeBron, you want um Steph Curry. They want those guys in from a marketing standpoint and what it means for viewers and TV and ratings and the whole 9 yards. They want that. So, Scott Foster, who called the game last night, if you follow the Rockets at all over the years, Scott Foster is one of the NBA officials who just hasn't. Not that officials are biased, but it just seems that Scott Foster has never been um, kind, or it just seemed like he got a little something when the Rockets play. Like he's not a Rockets fan, and not that officials should be fans, but I'm being careful about it because I don't want to say that like he's cheating against the Rockets. I'm not going there, but he does seem to call it a little tougher. That's what I'll say when the Rockets are in action. So there is that. So a lot of excitement as we go down the stretch. We wind down March. We get into April. Which is when March Madness wraps up. Actually, it wraps up actually in April. Then you start talking about the NBA wrapping up. The NFL draft is April the 25th, day one. And oh yeah, by the way, the Houston Astros, guys, they are in action. They will kick off their season officially. Let me see here. Just got to check their availability today. Wow. Okay. So the Houston Astros will, I wanted to get some notes. They're not out yet. So the Astros will open their season Thursday in an afternoon game against the New York Yankees. So right-handed pitcher Framber Valdez will take the mound. And for the Astros, he gets to start. And then for the Yankees, they're sending Nestor Cortez. He gets to start. So this is the third straight season that Valdez gets to start on opening day. He becomes the second lefty in Astros history to make three straight opening day starts. So here are the Astros who are sidelined. I want to talk about this a little bit. So they've got several pitchers on the spring training roster that will not begin the season on the active roster as they're recovering from various injuries. And so the group consists of right-hand pitcher Sean Dubin, may not mean a lot to many of you, but right-handed pitcher Luis Garcia, also Kendall Graveman, Lance McCullers, Oliver Ortega, Jose Urquidy, and Justin Verlander. So those are the pitchers that they have sideline. Verlander last pitched on Wednesday in a live batting practice outing in Florida. He threw 20 pitches to hitters on the backfield. So hopefully today we'll get a chance to talk. Maybe he'll be available to be able to talk to media, but he's not available to start the season. So we will see. Yainer Diaz is going to be the opening day catcher. We've heard a lot about that in terms of, it's his time, it's his job. Fans really wanted him. It's not really about fans, but he is the guy in that spot. And so we'll see, when it's yours and it's your responsibility and it's all you, we'll see how that really winds up. Um, do you think we'll ever get another NBA team? It's so interesting you say that, Aletha. Zena Garrison, who was on with us a few weeks back, but my longtime friend, one of my best friends, she's always like, I just can't believe Houston doesn't have a WNBA team. And when you think about it, when the WNBA started, that the Houston Comets won the first 4 championships. I actually was a part of their broadcast team for 2 of those championships. And so you're like, how is it possible? So I don't know. Somebody would have to step up, and maybe a team that's trying to maybe move from someplace else. And but it's amazing that there is not a team, right? um oh wow, I didn't know you played any tennis. Then I may have seen you as well, because we had to one of the things we did in our program at McGregor Park in the summers is we had to teach, those of us in the program had to teach um the community camps and stuff in the summers, and so that's what we did. So yeah, but yes, I don't know if there will ever be another team, WNBA team in Houston, but it sure seems like there should be, right? It sure seems like it. Now here's the other thing, I don't know if people remember this. When the WNBA started, they were all of the teams were attached to the NBA teams. So in the market, they were owned by the same owner. So Les Alexander would he owned the Rockets and the Comets. And so what they did was tie them into um, also those TV deals. And so there was a lot. It helped them start the league with a boost in terms of marketing and exposure, because of the TV packages and how they were promoted by the teams in town. Now you don't have to be tied to the NBA team. And so I think that's made a difference. It definitely got the Comets off to a great start in terms of just organization. I mean, though the stadium was sold out, they were back there, was still playing in the Compact Center. Back then, it was called the Compact Center, right? The old Summit, then it became the Compact Center before the team got the new stadium downtown. They played in the Compact Center and it would sell out. I mean, the stadium was packed. The energy was great. People loved it. The ticket price was obviously a little less than what it cost to see an NBA game, but there was just a lot of excitement around the WNBA, and it was unfortunate that it did not make it. So yeah. Oh yes, absolutely. I think we need some of the players should make that happen. Ex players. Well, yeah, it requires money, and I don't know what the number is, but it is something. And Chris Gardner, who has the Houston Round Ball Review. All he covers is basketball, and he does a lot with women's basketball. He's always talking about the WNBA, and when is there going to be a women's Final Four in Houston? I mean, he's been asking that question for quite some time. It seems like Houston should get one. We've had a few of the men's tournaments, Final Fours in Houston, but it does seem that the women's game, the Houston should host a women's Final Four as well. So they've got to get in the rotation, and they've got to do that by also starting to host some of the earlier rounds. So you know um, like the men do. I understand they don't have the financial support like the men. Yeah, that's true. And they don't make quite the same money, but it doesn't mean they couldn't work with somebody and get it done. I think that's a great question, and there are a lot of people who would probably really like to see a WNBA team back in Houston. So while we're talking about women's basketball, let me just take a moment to talk about a story that was came out over the weekend. Kim Mulkey, who is the head basketball coach for the LSU women's team. So she, on their off day last week, or the day between the first and second round game, so it must have been Saturday. She does this press conference, and I'm looking at the sports information guy. I don't know if that was a guy from the NCAA or from LSU who was sitting next to her at the table. And I know he was like, "What in the world is happening?" So she did like a 4-minute kind of rant about a story that has not come out yet, that the Washington Post is writing. And one of the things she did is she made all of us say, "Well, when's that story coming out? I'm going to be ready to read it." Right? And most people aren't reading the newspapers like they used to. But now everybody's ready to get a copy of that Washington Post story. So Coach Mulkey went on this rant. If you followed her, she's, anyway. Um, and she starts talking about this reporter from the Washington Post that was working on she called it a hit piece on her, and that they had been trying to interview her for 2 years. So in this 4-minute little rant that she gave, rant, soliloquy, whatever you want to call it, she said, for 2 years they've been trying to interview me and I wouldn't do it. And then last week they said, you got 48 hours. They sent her the questions to her. They sent them to her and the LSU to answer these questions. So maybe they sent them on Tuesday. You got to have them by Thursday. She said, well, we're trying to get ready for the tournament, and I'm not going to be distracted. So I'm like, so it's not really like it's 48 hours they gave you. Something gave you 2 years and 48 hours. Anyway, she went on to say that they've been trying to talk to former players and former coaches and some who been disgruntled. But you said that the disgruntled people, I guess they called and told her. That seems odd. How disgruntled are they? But let me just put a pin in it for a moment. As a journalist, if I'm doing a story, I should be getting interviews with other people. I don't know what the story is. I have no idea. But here's what I do know. She's very concerned about it. It's not going to be good for her. That's all I know. Just by how she's handled it. And she went on to say in this session that she is hired the best defamation law firm in the country, and that other people who have this problem with the media. And of course, she did this broad brush about the media. Sound familiar? Not to be trusted. All of these things, but she's not gonna have it. She's not gonna stand for it, and she has already hired the best defamation law firm in the country. And then, unfortunately, other people, who get, blasted by the media and they can't do it, but she can, because she's got the resources. So you've already hired a defamation law firm for a story that you haven't read yet, hasn't been put out. So a couple of things. And let me just say this: if any of you guys having some communication challenges, that's why you need to call me or DM me, because that's all the wrong ways of handling that, right? That is not how you get ahead of a crisis. That is not how you get ahead of a story. She did it all wrong. What she did was put more eyes on it. She sounded incredibly defensive, and it just wasn't a good look. And I'm sure that somebody has advised her, and she probably was advised to not do that, because I can't imagine any person that's a strategist, who understands communication, that would advise her to handle it that way. Because now what she's done is provide incredible advertising and marketing for the Washington Post and the story. And so now every day, people who don't even follow women's basketball, who may not even read the Washington Post, are all looking for it. I talked to a couple guys at the NBA game last night, the Rockets game, and they're like, man, when that story coming out? I can't wait to read it. I mean, you've now made it a big, big thing. So anyway, don't do that. If you don't want to hire me to help you, or hire somebody to give you some good direction about strategy, or crisis communications, just know that she did, don't do that. That is not the way to handle it. So I'll tell you that. And you're right, Charles. Women are making more than they used to. And listen, some of the women in college with that NIL money are making more than the women in the WNBA, but it just doesn't even compare to what the men's game plays. And Alita says it's 2024 year of truth and receipts. So here's what I know about the Washington Post. Haven't read the story. I don't even know which reporter it is. I didn't even spend any time trying to figure out who's writing the story. I just wait for it to come out. The Washington Post, if it's a hit piece, that's what you want to call it. Whatever the piece is, something that's going to be maybe controversial, hard hitting, whatever that is, they're not putting out a story without vetting it, without having their legal people make sure that they're covered in terms of their sources, their information. They're not doing it. They're not going to set themselves up for potentially being sued. That's just not how it works. And she's come out and done the whole I've got my and they probably had another pass at it there with their legal team. Listen, I've worked in media my entire adult life. And when I've worked at stations or papers, when there were investigative pieces, you best believe that the management would have the lawyers look at those stories because what they don't want is to become this revolving door for lawsuits. One, it's not journalistically sound to do pieces that are libelous or not based in fact. That's not what we do as a journalist, right? That's not it. Now let me just tell you, I realize there are a lot of people who are telling stories and have shows that do things differently. It doesn't mean that they're journalists. And I'm always talking about vet where you get your information. You know, what's the person's background? What's their experience? There are just standards that we are held to that somebody who just goes online and starts to show is not, because you're not bound, or you're not held by the same standards as we are. So that's what I say. It's going to be interesting. Aletha says, sound like the Diddy stuff and Trump. Man, listen, that's a whole nother show. I don't know what that is, but it's something. We know what it is with Trump, and the Diddy stuff is just wow. And you're right, it's the Washington Post. It's one of the stellar publications in the country. I'm not saying that they've never gotten it wrong, but this is an organization, this is a publication that is known for its investigative stories. I mean, from back, if you go back to the Watergate days and beyond, right? They do it differently. Now, I'm not saying it's not a hit piece. I don't know what it is, but just because she calls it that, if there's something that's not favorable about her, doesn't make it a hit piece. It just makes it a story. But let me tell you this: I don't know when the story is going to be out. I haven't checked today to see if it's dropped. But if she loses to Iowa, the Washington Post is not going to be what she has to worry about, right? Because you create this conversation about what you're doing and this energy, and now people are looking, how's your team doing? Because that's really what's supposed to be happening. So that's a story I wanted to talk about. Yes, I will definitely keep you posted. And there's another story that I wanted to talk about. So the Utah women's basketball team, who lost to Gonzaga, talked about an experience they had. The head coach talked about how the team experienced a series of racial hate crimes after they got to the tournament. It was their first, at the first hotel that they checked into. I've not heard the details of what happened, but she talked about it. And so the team had to relocate. She said that the NCAA and the people at Gonzaga, they were playing in the Gonzaga, in their basically hometown, helped them find another hotel. So the team had to they were forced to change hotels after what they call racial hate crimes. Gonzaga entered a statement and said that they don't condone it. They're sorry that the Utah team experienced that. And, that's not who they want to be. That's not who they are. And that is unacceptable. Is this the governor? So this is the governor of Idaho. He said, thanks to that Idaho community for stepping up to reinforce that the city is a welcoming, safe place. Whenever discussed, I'm going to skip to the bottom. Whenever discussing incidents like these have occurred in our state, I have seen Idahoans come through every single time to stand up for our shared values, show respect, love, and compassion for others, and on and on and on. Anyway, that's crazy. And so, for those of you who think, and I don't know if any of you watch Chalk Talk, maybe you're not here, that there is not stuff still happening, that they're not still incidents of racial hatred and violence all the time. The team from Utah had to deal with it in Idaho. Okay. So these young women who are there to, this is a great time. You're playing in it's March Madness, you're playing in the NCAA tournament, and it's so bad that the team didn't feel safe. They had to relocate. So anyway, their tournament run is over. They lost to Gonzaga, but that was just really kind of crazy. And so hate to hear that. Charles says, I'm getting a subscription to the Washington Post now. I know, right? Yeah, Kim Mulkey is really interesting. A couple things before I get out that I also want to touch on. The NFL has granted Cal McNair the right to be the owner of the football team. And what happens is, he was running the team, but Miss Janice, his mom, was the team owner, right? And so they put in a bid, made a request of the National Football League for the change to be made. And I'm going to share the post the Texans made that shows you it is official, where they have granted the Texans Miss McNair's request. And so Cal McNair is now the owner, the official owner. I mean, he's always been running a team, but he is the owner. And so it's a statement from his mom, Miss McNair, who talked how extremely proud that she is. Cal is going to continue to lead the team, and how much her late husband, Mr. McNair, would be proud of the work Cal's doing, and just to secure the future under Cal's leadership. She said, I know how pleased Bob would be to see this, and our fans should be incredibly excited about the direction we are headed. I will continue to support Cal and the team in every way that I can, and of course, be rooting for us each and every week. And then, of course, Cal had a statement who said he wanted to acknowledge the incredible work of his mother that she's done to lead over the last 5 years since taking over when Mr. McNair passed away. And he can't thank her enough. It's an exciting time to be a Houston Texan, and he's honored to lead the franchise. This move ensures the long-term stability of our franchise, and we will continue to operate the way we have been over the last couple of years, pursuing a championship for the city of Houston while doing great things in the community for our fans. So I think a couple of things to know, obviously, about this is in recent weeks, over the past few months, there was a push by one of the siblings, Cal's brother, Kerry, who tried to have Mrs. McNair declared, I don't want to say incompetent, but like incapacitated, that he needed to step in and like kind of take over. And they had to go to court, and it was fought out in court. They ruled in favor of Miss McNair that she could make her own decisions. And so in the wake of that being done, this move came. So in the future, and the NFL has approved it and said yes. And so now Cal McNair is the owner of the Houston Texans. And so it'd be much more difficult for his brother, Kerry, at some point down the road or in the future to make a push. So I wanted to share that because that is one of the things that's happened. And the other thing is the NFL owners meetings are going on. And the competition committee is making a rule change that a lot of players are talking about it that they don't like. So the NFL has banned what they call a hip drop tackle. So I'm going to just show you a picture of what it looks like, because many people are saying, Kim, what is that? And I'm going to show you. Okay, so let me see. Can you see that? So, what it does is it makes it much more difficult. So according to the agreed upon criteria of the now, it's illegal technique. So here's what a swivel hip drop tackle takes place, right? This is when it happens when a player grabs a runner with both hands and arms while attempting to make a tackle. So it's basically you're grabbing his lower body and you're pulling him to the ground, and then you kind of land sometimes on top of the runner, and it traps the runner's legs or at or below the knee. So Why is that a thing? Well, because players, defensive players, are like, this is one more thing that makes it difficult for us to, let me stop sharing, for us to defend, right? So it makes it more dangerous because, like, what, how are we supposed to tackle the guys, right? You can't grab them high. You can't do the horse collar, which that's been banned. But and I understand the NFL wants it to be a league where they score points. Fans like offense, they like scoring points. But at some point, you've got to give the defense something to work with. And so there's a lot of conversation about it. I even heard, I was listening to RG3 yesterday on Get Up, or one of the ESPN shows, and as a offensive player, he thought it was a bad idea, right? Some typically offensive players like, great, because it makes it better for them, but you've got to give the defense some means. You can't take everything away, and unfortunately, football is a physical sport, and guys get hurt, and that's unfortunate. But it's going to be difficult to play this game unless you end up putting flags on them and guys not get hurt. I think that they should be protected. If you're talking about head injuries, that things that can be long lasting and change, quality of life and all of that. Obviously, yeah, better helmets, all of the penalties that do away with, horse collar or hitting the guy in the head. I mean, yeah, you want to protect the head above the shoulders. Above the shoulders, those injuries, you've got to protect that as much as you can. But it's a physical sport, and unfortunately, in a physical sport, people get hurt, and it is unfortunate that sometimes injuries then become, season ending, but it's a part of the game. So anyway, I don't know. I just think it is interesting. Aletha said, I'm not going to Idaho ever." So it worked and they lost. That's what hurt Bo and Joe Theismann. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could call those that. I mean, Bo Jackson, you're talking about, and Joe Theismann, that awful injury that Joe Theismann had, the ankle injury. And so I'm not saying guys don't get hurt with it, but I just don't know how you take it out of the game. It's going to be interesting to see how defensive teams, defensive coaches coach around where they can still, be competitive defensively and not and avoid these hip drop tackles, because this tackle will be a 15-yard penalty and automatic first down according to the NFL. And if a player brings his opponent to the ground by performing the first two steps, but lands off to the side without swiveling around and landing on his legs, and then that tackle would be deemed legal. So what they're really concerned about is when the defensive player, lands on top of the offensive player. And so they say that the technique has become more popular in recent years as players look to avoid using their helmets and tackles, which draws penalties and increases the risk of concussions. So, the league officials said they felt compelled to take measures to ban the tackle after observing 230 instances of the now illegal tackle during last season's game. That averaged out to roughly one occurrence per game, which was roughly up 65% from 2022. They also said this is the last thing I'll say about it, that 15 tackles led to injuries that caused players to miss at least one game last season. So they're trying to explain why they did it. And you're right. Charles says it'll make it difficult to tackle a runner from behind. You're absolutely right. So the key is he can't get behind you, right? Because you're not going to slow drag him from the back. It's going to be difficult for you. So if you can tackle him and land to the side and don't end up on his body, and if you can do all of that, then it's legal. But how do you even know? So anyway, training camp should be interesting, right? And the last thing before we get out of here, I will say, is the Houston Texans will play in the Hall of Fame game against the Bears this summer, preseason game, which is great because Andre Johnson is going to be inducted into the Hall. So Houston will play a game. We'll play the Hall of Fame game on the 1st of August. And I think it's on the 3rd or the 4th that the enshrinement happens. So I'm going to start trying to make plans now so that I can be there for not for the game, but really for DeAndre Johnson enshrinement into the Hall. It'll be the Houston Texans' first player ever to go into the Hall of Fame. It's Andre Johnson, a city favorite, a fan favorite, and super exciting for him. So all that's going to be happening is going to be happening. And also, I want to say this. I will continue to do Chalk Talk, but I'm working to launch another show that'll be that I will do that really focuses on the other side of my business. I'll tell you more about it and when I'm going to launch it in the next couple of weeks. But although I do different interviews on Chalk Talk, and I'll still do that, I'm going to have a channel that really just talks about the work I do in the communication space. So people like, Kim Mulkey, but not her, and need help, can come and get it information, and it's clear that this is where you find it. Media training, communication strategy, crisis communication, leadership, the things that I consult on and coach on the other side of my business and that I speak on, I'm going to have a space that's dedicated just to those topics so that people can find it easily. When you come to Chalk Talk, you're going to get all the information about sports and even big news topics that are happening. But I want to have a space that's really more focused on the business. And wow, I almost forgot. Sending prayers to the people of Baltimore and Maryland. That was just awful. That the bridge was collapsed. A barge hit it. The barge apparently lost power, and so they lost the ability to control it. And it hit the bridge, and it took the bridge down. It was late at night, like one something in the morning. So, that's much better than it happening at people going to work or coming from work. So not as many people on the bridge. There was a construction crew on the bridge at the time fixing some potholes, and it was a crew of 8. 6 of those were unaccounted for the last time I checked. So that's been a couple of hours before I started getting here for the show. And not sure how many cars were on the bridge, but just tragic and devastating for families and victims who are directly involved. And then what it means to Baltimore and Maryland overall. I mean, that Baltimore has the 9th largest port in the country. And now that it's not a thoroughway, right, for cargo and ships to go through because it's a crime scene. I say a crime scene. It's a scene where they're doing the search and rescue mission is underway, and they have to get all that debris from the channel and all of that, right? So prayers and, to the people of Baltimore and Maryland, and especially for victims. I mean, man, imagine you're driving across that bridge. I don't know how many cars there were across the bridge. I think they got information. They were alerted by the cargo when they found out that they didn't have control of the vessel. They had lost power. So I think they were able to stop cars, but I don't know how many cars had already gone onto the bridge. I have no idea. And it happened I think at 1:30 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time, maybe. So 12:30, here. But man, pray for the folk in Baltimore and pray that the search and rescue mission is as successful as possible. I think that channel is about 50 feet deep. So they've got to look for people first because, human life is what is first and foremost important. And then they've got to go back in and try to clean the channel up so they can get it back open. And then they got to rebuild the bridge, right? Because it's a connector. So all that's happening. Here's what I'm saying, y'all. Live right, stay prayed up. If that's your thing, it is my thing. And, try to be kind to each other because there's just so much happening. Be kind to somebody whenever you can. You don't know what they've been through on that day. So that's my word of encouragement. Also, there are going to be runoff elections coming up. So be on the lookout. I'm going to tell you when they start. Vote in the runoffs. If you're not registered to vote, get registered so that whenever there's an election, you've got to be registered 30 days before. But if you just get registered and start voting, you don't have to worry about it. You will stay registered. So if you're not registered to vote, get registered. If you are, get somebody in your family or in your community or one of your friends, help them get registered. And then you guys educate yourselves about the politician and the policies, right? So that you can vote your values and what matters to you and your community. I'll never tell you who to vote for. I am always going to say you got to vote. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't try so hard to keep us from voting. All right, everybody. Thank you for being a part of Chalk Talk. Thank you for being so engaged. Thank you, Charles, about the new show. And yes, Earlitha, we all need to pray for Baltimore and Maryland and just the world in general, because y'all, it's crazy. It's crazy out here. I'll keep you posted when I hear what Kim Mulkey, what the story is. I will post the story and all of that. And so remember, do something kind for yourself and do something kind for somebody else. Make it a great week, everybody. I'll see you next week on Chalk Talk, and coming soon on this other Kim Davis show that I have not settled on a name yet. Let me ask you guys this, and you can put it in the chat. A couple of names I've toyed with was I was going to call it the Communicast, right? Because all things about communication is more than that, but that. And then I had somebody recommend call it the broadcast, but I may just call it the Kim Davis show, so it covers it all. I don't know. What do you think? I'd love to hear from you. Drop it in the chat. Send me a DM. Let me know. And stay tuned, because I'm going to be posting what the specials are for spring that I'm putting out, where you can get some coaching or training with either me critiquing a video for you and having a strategy session about how you can show up more confidently on camera. It's not you're not quite ready for a whole media training session, but you do want some help in that space. I'll have a special. There's going to be a bonus LinkedIn guide with it as well. And the other special is going to be about podcasts. If you want to start a show and you need some help, I will do a 1-hour strategy session to help you get going, and also include the LinkedIn guide. So stay tuned. Those are going to be specials when I launch it later today. It'll be up for 2 weeks, and I hope you check it out. If you have questions, send me an email, send me an instant message. Communication with Kim. Okay, thank you, Carolyn. That's why I didn't think of that. Communication with Kim, because I don't want to limit it to just communication, but communication about communication, media training, leadership. I like that. Thank you. I appreciate you. All right, everybody, make it a great week. Remember, it's springtime, and happy Easter if you celebrate Easter. It's Holy Week. If you celebrate Holy Week, act accordingly. All right, everybody. Peace.